Okay. Hi, everyone. Welcome. We're at meeting 2 of 4 that we have planned, although we'll talk about this in this meeting. I think we have a couple potential working group sessions that we'd like to host as well. And I think Lauren has a couple optional meetings as well that we'll talk about on the schedule. But thanks for being here on this Monday. Same contact information if you haven't contacted us before. Lauren and myself, Jenna, are located here. Lauren is our primary point of contact, so kind of all questions go to Lauren, but if you'd like to copy me, that'd be great. We kind of work hand in hand on everything. So one way or the other, it'll probably meet both of our inboxes for most things. I've kept many of the intro slides here just so you don't have to search for which meeting included what links where, but I'll breeze past them since we went through them in more detail last meeting, but know that they'll probably be included in all of the slide decks going forward so that they're easily accessible to you. I think the majority of what we'll talk about today is this last bullet point here, the updates that we've made thus far according to our priority list. Sharing the priority list as it exists right now and what we're intending for the rest of this edition update. There are a few open items that we wanted to talk about with you all and kind of plant the seeds for thinking about and getting back to us. And then a long list of pending updates that we still have planned but have not yet tackled for this version update. Lauren has been keeping track of our membership. Thank you for everyone who's involved in dedicating your time and expertise. I think there's been just a few changes to this list. Lauren, did you want to talk about those or just leave it as a visual?
I think as a visual, actually, no, I'll say something. So historically, we've always kept the Commerce and CADMIS team on this. We currently have 92 members of the TRMAC for TRM version 5.1. That's a lot of people. So I've removed Commerce folks and CADMIS folks from this list. If you have any questions about that, please feel free to reach out.
Great. Okay, schedule. Same general schedule, but we've applied some tentative dates to the rest of the schedule going forward. Lauren sent out meetings 2, 3, and 4 already. So if you have not received meetings 3 and 4, do let us know. It's not an invite only link, so a colleague could forward it to you, but we want to make sure that you're officially included in our distribution email list so that you don't miss anything going forward, even if you're invited by a colleague. So let us know if you don't have those meeting 3 and 4 on your schedule, on your calendar, and we will get you included. I don't believe the optional presentation is yet on our calendars, but you'll see that coming probably from Lauren soon. I'll talk about this further when we get to the slides, but we're thinking about a new construction related working group. I think there's just a few different things on our priority list that's sort of all circling around new construction. We know we have a few experts on our membership list that we'd like to pick their brains about. We will probably send out an email later this week and try and get something on the calendar before meeting 3 so that we can then report back at meeting 3 what was discussed and kind of the direction that group is leaning on certain things. Our cadence is generally one big group meeting a month until we get to the end of October, and we're anticipating a very similar schedule to the last 2 years where we're starting to issue a full red line version in October, getting non-regulatory feedback back from you guys before we start the official regulatory process in mid to late October, with the goal always of getting this thing published and finalized just before the end of the calendar year, ideally dodging the holidays at the end of the calendar year. If you have questions or concerns about that schedule, let us know. But this is what we're currently targeting, and we would anticipate a little bit of wiggle happening toward the end of this schedule as we sort it out as we get closer. Again, if you have not yet accessed our internal collaboration site, which is a SharePoint site, do let us know if you're having issues with access. Be a little finicky, at least for me, to access it, but we will have all of our sort of working documents up there. It's becoming more relevant now. I do have things populated in these folders with instruction at this meeting to, if you have time and inclination, to take a look at them and provide feedback if you're able. The external webpage is where, as Lauren mentioned, all of the recordings and the slide deck will be posted pretty readily after this meeting for future viewing. Also, all prior years are up there as well if you need them. As I talk through some of the updates we've made today, they are located currently on our collaboration site for you to take a look at. Under this draft TRM 5.1 folder is just a single very large Word document, which is the red line version of the master TRM. Thus far, all edits we've made have been within that document rather than pulled out into individual work papers, just because of the nature of the edits are modifications and clarifications or holistic things that make sense to do across the TRM. Mostly work papers are, if we're developing a new measure, we'll just keep it in its individual multi-page Word document before incorporating it into the larger TRM, or if we're taking a measure kind of apart, making some significant changes, we'll pull it out into a work paper. But right now, there are no work papers. I would anticipate for next meeting, meeting 3, we will have some new measures that we will be distributing for review, and they'll show up there. We do have a few, maybe half a dozen new workbooks created. They are located in this first folder. Draft workbooks, those are Excel calculations of a measure, kind of a live calculation with an example working through it. I've called it, for lack of a better word, final Excel workbooks or library of workbooks. And this is all of the workbooks that we have by measure from prior years. And when we are revisiting one of those for edits this year, I will usually keep it within this final workbook folder rather than moving it into draft, just so as not to confuse people. But the notes within this presentation will indicate where it's located. And if you have questions, let me know and I can help you find it. And then at the very bottom here is the priority list that Lauren and I often reference. This is just a simple Excel-based list of where we're tracking the different items that we're intending to do this year, and if they're done or not. So I don't believe much has changed on this slide. The new card grants will be announced, I think, today. So by meeting 3, we will have a more expanded list of what the current research is going on and what we might be able to pull from for future TRM modifications, which is exciting. But this is research that's currently in progress and has been for a little while. Okay, into the main meat of today. So updates, just wanted to provide you guys kind of a status update of where we were at. Thank you for all the feedback that we've received anytime, but between the last meeting and this one, we've received several comments, answers to questions that we posed, additional feedback on changes that we might consider. Several of them have dumped onto our priority list and pretty high. And one of them was, it is probably time for us to start driving by the M1 metrics for the applicable equipment, given 2023 being the start date of some of that. And now this TRM is for issue a couple years from now. It makes sense, I think, for that to be the primary driver rather than the older M metrics. So we've started to make that modification throughout the TRM. There are a couple of things that we still have yet to do. Appendix G, namely, is still on the list. But for right now, within the Word TRM, we've made some modifications there. It kind of breaks down into 3 different types of measures, just for your reference. For lack of a better title, upgrade measures, upgrade type measures would be comparing old equipment to new equipment. And so the efficiency difference between the two becomes the savings, which is the trickiest one because the new equipment is M1 metrics, depending on the type of equipment, and the old is probably the older metrics if it's actuals. So we've modified the algorithm to be driven by the M1 metrics, and if baseline is actual, not using a deemed value, and it's in the older metrics, we have the forward conversion table still within each of those measures with instruction to convert forward rather than converting everything backward. So the most changes are happening there in those types of measures. The algorithm inputs would change to M1. I'll give you an example rather than talk about this kind of abstractly. I think Res HVAC AC is one of those where we've modified the algorithm, as you can see, to SEER2, ER2, and then modified the input definitions to note for the baseline to go forward rather than backward, presumably. And then for efficient, there is no note there because we're expecting that all of the newer equipment that's being installed is going to be in the M1 metrics for that type of equipment, at least. So relatively simple change there, but it required kind of reworking most of the examples related to those types of measures. And so for many of these, we have new workbooks or modified workbooks, just so that this is all consistent. Existing type measures, again, for lack of a better word, example might be a tune-up measure where it's an older piece of equipment. It could be any age equipment, but presumably the majority is prior to M1 metrics. We've sort of left that one as is, the algorithm at least, and added consistent notes for all those types of measures to, if you have M1 metrics instead of M metrics, to use them consistently across all of the inputs. If anyone's finding, as you're reviewing this, if you're finding any of this confusing, or if you have a better idea of how to tackle some of these, I'm all ears. So please do get back to us as you take a look. But I think right now that's probably the majority of the equipment's going to fall in the older efficiency category rather than newer. But I think that's something that we would revisit in the next couple editions of the TRM as equipment ages, or is replaced, I should say. The new type measures, for lack of a better word, also not a comparison. It's looking at a newer system, so like a quality install measure. Presumably it's new equipment that meets M1 metrics rather than M. And so we have changed where they weren't already, and many of them were. We've changed them to be driven by the M1 metrics with instruction to convert forward if you happen to have actuals in their older metrics, but I think it's probably not applicable. So we removed the backward conversion tables. Again, I'll show you on the TRM what I'm talking about here. We had this placed in here with a forward conversion and a backward conversion. I think with these changes, it doesn't make sense to have the backward anymore. So we've removed that and reference to it, and just have left it at the forward conversion at this point. And another holistic change we've made is anywhere where we had the baseline kind of standards and the efficiency standards represented in both M metrics and M1 metrics, we've removed M just to favor M1. Hopefully that also reduces confusion. I know there was some conversion confusion and like, which do we use and how do we use them uniformly? And I'm hoping that that solves that problem. And we've made those changes throughout. So specific measures where that relates. I'm actually showing you this one here, the efficient AC air source heat pump measure. Edits are made within the draft and track changes, as you can see, the new workbook associated with it. I made another change that I'll talk about in a few slides after we get done with the M1 topic. This is an upgrade type measure. Another upgrade type measure, of course, is the air source heat pump for residential. I will note that workbook is not yet created. That one and the commercial heat pump measures, I want to think about more. I think there are more changes coming to both, and I'd like to hold off creating a workbook until we kind of understand what we're doing in this version and can do it once and not create a workbook and then modify it later. But this one in particular, I promise this one's coming. We will have it for this edition of the TRM because I know it's needed. Rework some examples usually with most of these with different metrics where we needed to change it. More changes coming with Appendix G. We haven't really tackled that one yet because we, again, want to make a few more changes to Appendix G before we call that final. But we'll roll this M1 conversion or driven supposedly effort into that Appendix G as we make those changes. Quality install for us and is a new type of measure in that it's new equipment, and so that was actually already driven by M1 metrics, but we've clarified several things within it, made the notes kind of consistent. Tune-up and ERV both already had workbooks. We've modified them. Those are existing type measures where we're talking about older equipment. We haven't made many changes to those, but we've done, we've unified kind of our comments on what to do and when and how to be consistent with metrics being used across those measures. There are a few other measures that I didn't include on this list on the res side that were all existing measures, measure types. Very small changes made to those. But they're in the track changes of the main document. On the commercial side, similar process here. It applies in fewer places just because it tends to be smaller equipment where this is applicable. Heat pump credit measure has become a giant one. I have not created a workbook because I really want to break this measure into its component equipment pieces. But I'd like to do that when we integrate efficient fuel switching element to that, which requires some primary data about switchover temperature and things we don't currently have that I know are in the works. So I'd like to wait to do that whole thing as one effort and then create a workbook for it. So I'm not sure that this workbook will be created this year, but it will be created soon. This one, if you have time and it's short, of course it's short, take a look at this one. I'm finding that because there's so much different equipment at different sizes using different metrics, it's always been a little bit of a complicated measure, but I think I'm hoping I didn't make it even more complicated. So if there's something in there that isn't clear, please let me know and we can work through this one. It's kind of a monster. Heat pump RTU. So this one is a relatively new measure and it was already driven by M1 metrics. So we made a few changes to this one. It did have an existing workbook that we've modified. Note that we are expecting to make further modifications to this measure with additional primary data from ETA once we have it. So this one I would expect to still change within this version of the TRM, but right now it's up there for your review. Mini splits. This is an upgrade, as is the next measure, unitary cooling and split systems. So that would be a comparison between a baseline or existing equipment and newer equipment. So that's where the algorithm sort of was modified most to M1 metrics as applicable to the equipment. We did not have a workbook already for the unitary cooling and split systems. That one's new. It's up there. A couple of existing type measures. We have demand controlled ventilation and ERV. We touched ERV last year, so that had a workbook, which we've modified, updated. Demand controlled ventilation, that's a new measure. We have other changes made to that measure, which I'll discuss in the next few slides, but this is sort of the holistic list of things that we touched related to trying to drive algorithms more from the M1 efficiency metrics and provide a little bit of more consistency across all of those related measures. So that was a big part of what we did in the last month. Take a look through these. I would recommend maybe use this presentation as the list and then open the track changes version of the TRM and go to each of these bookmark links in order, rather than just scrolling through this monster of a document. But again, as you have time, I'd love your feedback on it. Other changes we made, the feedback that we received from stakeholders kind of always takes the highest priority for us. So that's what we tackled first. It also wanted to make sure if we had questions that came out of it or a review from the TRMAC needed, we'd have plenty of time in the sequence to address that. So we're working on other things, but I wanted to get these things done for discussion. For residential, this whole page is residential. Clothes dryers. We had a change to the baseline from the federal standard that we made within the TRM whole version for this particular measure. We've also had questions about where combination units and laundry centers and all-in-one units and even heat pump units fit in, and I've clarified that basically they're all included or could be included because it's all the same CEF metric that can be applied to the algorithm. And then for units that are doing both the washing and the drying, I've added clarification to both of those measures that the instructions to use both individual measures, savings algorithms to in combination come up with savings for that single piece of equipment. Rather than have a separate measure that just deals with a combo unit, but let me know if that's going to cause problems with how it's used in your programs, or if it would make more sense, or would be more useful to have maybe in addition a measure that covered both the washing and the drying cycles and their respective savings. Anyway, take a look through those two. Actually, I call out clothes dryers because that was actually where the changes were made, but I made some notes in washers as well. Each has a workbook. Domestic hot water shower head replacement for electric domestic hot water and gas domestic hot water units both have the same general changes. Some clarifications were requested around the examples, the inputs, and some of the references needed updating. They haven't really been touched since they were initially developed. So in updating some of the references, we updated some of the values to align with what those references were indicating. Small things, but some changes. And then HVAC thermostats also hasn't been touched in a few iterations. We made a very, very minor modification to an example, I think was off by 1 decimal place. So we modified that. But given that opportunity, we made a workbook for it. So those are all up on the folder. Dehumidifier, that one had an Energy Star criteria update, I think a year and a half ago. We didn't get to last year. So we have modified that measure with the new criteria and reference, and have a new workbook for that. So I think I have one more Energy Star reference, this one, to talk about. And I'll say between the federal baseline update for clothes dryers and the performance criteria under Energy Star for dehumidifiers and air source heat pumps, that's what we're tracking in terms of if baseline and efficient standard updates. If there's something that you know of that we're missing, please do let us know. I want to make sure that we get that in there and don't lose sight of it. And if we're not tracking it in this list, then we're not tracking it at all. So do let us know if you know of something that changed. Anyway, air source heat pumps. This is probably still being worked on. So I do not have a workbook, as I mentioned. The edit aside from the M1 changes that we just talked about, with the sunsetting of the Energy Star AC unit specifications, they kind of created a new one for air source heat pump. So we had to split that reference, which had been combined before. We have the AC reference still in there, even though it is sunset. It still is the efficient standard for that measure. But the air source heat pump is technically in a different specification now. None of those numbers have changed, although I will highlight that I noted that we have 7.8 HSPF 2 for air source heat pumps in the measure currently, and the performance criteria for Energy Star indicate for cold climate units, it's 8.1 for single package heat pumps and 8.5 for split heat pumps. And that does also align with the proposed thresholds for the HERE program. So I was proposing to update those values slightly higher to 8.1 and 8.5. And that's in the track changes of the TRM. I'm interested in your feedback on that, and if that's gonna be a problem or if we have different ideas there. So anywhere where I have these red highlighted question or propose, Lauren and I will make sure that that's in our summary email that goes out later so that it's kind of at the top of the list to respond to us about. But that's an outstanding question I have for you. On the commercial side, just a few things. I mentioned demand controlled ventilation before in terms of M1 metrics, but we also made modifications to that measure, clarifying some of the inputs. The example, I think, was a little muddled. Some of the assumptions needed a little more information, and references were pretty old. So we made some updates there. Question that came out of this. This measure, if you read the description, is intended for modifying an existing system, and that system is indicated in the description as only being applicable to a DX cooling system with natural gas heating, which is probably the predominant system that this is applied to. I'm curious if there's any need out there from your programs, or if you're pursuing this in a custom fashion, to expand this measure to include maybe different conditioning systems, like an all electric heating, whether it's electric resistance or air source heat pump. Although I assume if it's air source heat pump, it's probably less of a modification to demand controlled and more of included holistically. But just a question out there. It seemed a little limiting, and if it could be expanded and useful, I'd like to look into that, but I didn't want to do it if no one's gonna use it. So question, if that would be useful to take a look at expanding this measure, or if it's useful as is. Demand control ventilation for kitchen exhaust hood. This one was an old measure, hasn't been touched in a long time. So we took a look at all the references and made updates, streamlined the algorithm just a little bit, updated the measure description. The example was really muddled. We've kind of rewritten that, provided some more clarifications on the inputs. It was a few changes, but we've still made it within the draft TRM, rather than pulling out it as a work paper. So it's in there. LED lighting for a grow light application. This was a measure that we added last year. So the workbook was existing, we've modified it. We've had a request to add in reflector efficiency, which is reflected in some of the utility versions of this measure, rather than our source document, which was Illinois TRM, which did not include this. So Excel, if you have time to take a look at this one in particular, I'd really like your feedback on it. It did make a pretty sizable change in the savings, which I have in the example, which is a pretty arbitrary example. In the example that's worked out in the workbook, I have the output with the modification and the output without, just to show kind of the scale comparison of savings. So I'd like everyone's feedback on it, but maybe Excel in particular, as I know that you're using this measure in this form or close to this form. If it aligns with what your expectations are, and if you have further feedback that we could consider on this one. But that draft is out there in the TRM, but then also maybe take a look at the workbook because it'll have the old and the new side-by-side comparison. Okay, so that is edits made to date. Everything else we have are sort of open-ended discussion items for you all. And then projections of what we're looking at for the rest of this process. We put a few questions out there really vaguely in our last meeting. Thank you for those who got back to us on them. We had a few, I think these came in the regulatory process last year. Some questions or requests for additions that we've been thinking about. The first was that we have technically not included the percent primary into the algorithm for the quality install, particularly to the air source heat pump portion, which is true. And I think that we were leaning toward not including it, just because it feels like it's adding a great deal of complexity and for small gain and efficiency, accuracy, but primarily because it's then asking for the switchover temperature as a data collection point, which I'm a little nervous about for that particular measure. And the feedback that we've received since meeting one seems to suggest that they agree. This is by no means closed, so if you have more feedback on that, please let us know. Just wanted to update you on kind of the direction that was being leaned toward on all of these based on feedback. The next was the question of should we add ground source heat pump and air to water heat pump and really any other specialty equipment that we had added last year as measures into the existing quality install measure or create a new quality install measure specific to that equipment. And we were leaning in the direction of, while it theoretically makes sense, we're not clear on if that actually exists and if we have any percent savings to lean on for that. Given it's such specialty pieces of equipment, it might be a given at this point that it is installed in a quality install way by a contractor that's kind of specialized in that equipment. But we're open to information that you have on that. And I think as time goes on, this is definitely one that will become something we need to revisit as that equipment becomes more prevalent in the market, and therefore maybe a divergence in install types and quality. But right now we're leaning in the direction of not including that specialized equipment, and the feedback we've received since meeting one seems to lean in that direction as well. But again, if you have additional information or thoughts on that, do let us know. And the last one that we posed open-ended last meeting was the idea of revisiting a new construction baseline. Specific, the question was specific to ground source heat pump, but I think it kind of applies to air source heat pump and all of the residential HVAC measures where we deemed the new construction baseline to be a code compliant air source heat pump. Which is maybe a little aggressive given it doesn't have to be that. And so we're kind of noodling on some blend of electric resistance if we're looking at a entirely electric baseline. And this seems to, while it's not the same as one of our high priority topic areas of, EFS and EDA, usually commercial new construction buildings, and we have another lighting new construction question that's out there, and it seems like we've got a lot of new construction questions kind of floating around that we sort of need to work through, and we're hoping we can create a working group on new construction related topics that will span residential to commercial, prescriptive to custom EDA type of modeling exercises. So I realize that's broad, and the only thing that holds it together is new construction. But I know that we've got several people specialized in that in our membership, and I'd really like to kind of pick your brains and start thinking about the direction we'd like to lean in those topic areas, and then report back to the larger TRMAC group on what we talked about and sort of the direction with a little bit more clarity by meeting 3, and then potentially, if we need to, have another working group, the same group of people. So the request is here, if you could respond to Lauren by Wednesday, if you'd like to be included in that working group. It's going to be around generally new construction topics. We will probably grab a few of you that we're already in communication with, whether you want to be included or not. We hope that you will be, but of course you can opt out. But if you're interested, please let Lauren know and we can include you in that. And our intention is to have that meeting sometime in the next 4 weeks before meeting 3, so that we can report back meeting 3. Okay, another one that we really loosely researched, and I just wanted to put in front of you guys early before we go further on this one. We had a request to revisit the EFS savings that are currently on our residential and commercial electric vehicle measure that we, I think, developed in 4.0. Right now, the way that we have it is it's based on an individual vehicle and based on the mileage that it would go in a single year, extrapolating out the difference between gasoline and electric and attributing all of those efficient fuel switch savings to the vehicle. Rather than splitting it amongst a private charger, which was something we were thinking about. We didn't really consider public chargers at the time, but we've had a request to take a look at whether we could split some of the savings between the existing measure that it's on the individual vehicle and a recognition that some of the charging does happen outside of the home. It happens out on public level 2 chargers. And I think we had 80-20 kind of in our mind as a split, and online sources seem to all quote that 80-20, but when I've dug into like where that came from, it doesn't really, it probably comes from an actual data source, but it's not, it's pretty opaque. So I can't quite get to the bottom of that number, but in coming at it a few different ways, also from the Department of Energy, I've found a few things that seem to indicate what could give us a weighted average of where EVs are located, and like by that location, what the charging pattern looks like. And it seems to come down to, if we just weighted averaged all of it together, more 60-40, which was a more divergent split than I expected. This is a national landscape rather than Minnesota specific. I would really like it to be Minnesota specific, but I'm not sure we have that data right now, but it is something that we have feelers out to our Minnesota departments that could potentially give us more information on this in future. But the ask on this one is, if you have initial feedback on this kind of 60-40 split, feedback on the idea of splitting EFS savings from this measure as it exists now, it would involve creating a new measure for public level 2 chargers with a portion of the EFS savings associated with it. And then most importantly, maybe if you have additional data, particularly state specific, region specific, that could help us drill down these numbers a little bit better, I would really appreciate it. Okay. And then still pending, kind of a long list, but we still have some time in this edition. A few things that we've talked about last time that we want to provide clarity around. I think some of the instruction around the sales charging consumption of the EVs measure is a little opaque. So we'd like to provide some clarity around that, what documents are required, how you kind of trace back the number of cars to the region. We have not yet done that. Storm windows, air sealing, that measure is in progress. We're almost done with it. We need to clarify a few things with the research team, but I would expect to get that out there to you guys by next meeting and the meeting after. Excuse me. Air fryers, the Franklin Energy and Minnesota Power have research into that appliance and how it offsets gas ovens and other equipment. We have not yet seen that research, but we're expecting to see it in September, and we'll look into if it can fit into a measure and how. But that's on the list. And aligning on minimum performance standards for measures that overlap with the weatherization program I mentioned last time. We've yet to do that. With the last minute change to the residential furnace baseline, there's sort of a few things left undone. Some of them will probably have to remain incomplete for a little while. The res low E storm windows that was modeled. Not sure how we're going to change that one or if we will elect to. And res cellular shades was also modeled and not by a card team, not by us. So we'll have to look into how we can make modifications to that one in future. Other areas that we might not know about that we haven't thought about yet. And if you have noted something that we should be thinking about and adding to this list, let us know. And then of course, air source heat pumps. There's always work to be done on Appendix G to align. We've made some modifications over the winter to develop deemed savings based on modeling at the 90% baseline. That's currently in a later edition of Appendix G that was sent out. I've yet to put that into the air source heat pump measure, just in a table form, but that's pending. Yeah, and then on the CNI side, most of these are almost done. So I would expect meeting 3, we'll have some work papers for you on grain dryers, some updates to that. A new measure or several measures related to refrigeration equipment in grocery settings. That was card research. Switch reluctance motors, which fell off the list from last year, will be completed. Some modifications to our existing steam traps measure, just revisiting some of the deemed metrics and algorithms. It's been a while, and I know that that's a pretty well-used measure. So we want to take a look at the assumptions within it, make sure they're current. Good recommendation last year that we just didn't have time for, circulator pumps, efficiency index, incorporate into, I think, the existing measure that we have, or perhaps a new one, depending. That one hasn't been tackled yet. And some research on lighting controls from Minnesota ETA. I think that's still pending, that we're keeping an eye on incorporating. This is another new construction element that's been brought up, some outdated data in our CNI lighting new construction measure that we need to take a look at, code related. I know we have a few experts on that we'd like to kind of wrap that into the whole new construction working group discussion and get that nailed down. And then a outstanding ECM fan motor measure question on the algorithm and its organization that I didn't get to for this meeting. That's still pending. We'll discuss it meeting 3. Yeah, so long list. We're making our way through it. And then kind of circling back on our top priority ones, which are working kind of in the background long term, and are still in development. EFS guidance We will have a card meeting shortly. We'll invite all of the TRMAC distribution optional, in addition to the specific card study stakeholder group, which there's a lot of overlap. Either way, if you choose not to attend that meeting, we will report. I'll report back in meeting 3 and meeting 4 on the direction of the EFS guidance and the template associated with that guidance that's being developed. And the intent is to provide a little bit more of a guideline guardrails around how to follow through with step 1, 2, 3.1, and 3.2 from the legislation regarding EFS. It's not so opaque, especially 3.1, 3.2, which don't have a lot of specifics behind them. We've tried to add a little bit more. That will be introduced in a separate card meeting. Invite will go out shortly to talk more about those things. So that's in progress. The prescriptive process / guidance for specifically modeled EDA projects that are claiming EFS savings, we introduced that last meeting. That's sort of the basis around the working group that we're talking about for new construction. But again, there's a few different topics, new construction related, that we'd like to circle around on and just have a little bit more detailed conversations with folks on. So that's in the works, and we're hoping to have something to present, at least in outline form per the next meeting. An ask here, the M&B protocols, we have the current ones published at this link, current from 2008. The draft, which is mostly unchanged from where we landed on it last summer, is at this link. I think that's to our, yes, it's to our collaboration SharePoint site. If you haven't already taken a look at that, please do if you have time, and provide us feedback if you have any. We're not expecting many changes to this document, the Word document. What we are trying to do in the background is create an updated version of the template that goes kind of along with it, of like what to include in a project, what to provide the department as part of the review process. That companion piece is still being developed, but it will be based upon the protocols that are drafted already in that document. So if you have time to review, please do. Let us know if you have thoughts or additions or subtractions that you're thinking about. And then lastly, sort of stuck in here at the end, is incremental costs. As we review the triennial plans, we'll probably look to make some incremental cost changes where we see major divergence in what we have in the TRM that's old, based on old data. If we can make changes there, particularly to res HVAC, I think we'd be looking to do that, and then we'll put that in front of this group as proposed changes before we make that final. But those are the pending things we have on our radar. It's available in a more sequential list in that back to it up here. The Excel file at the bottom of our collaboration sites under the 5.1 folder, this Excel priority list that Lauren will update relatively frequently, but certainly before each meeting, has the full list of what we're tracking, if it's completed, and if there's a workbook associated with it, etc. Yes. So with that, we will summarize some of the topics we talked about today, but particularly the things where we had questions posed to you or feedback that we're requesting in our follow-up email that you'll receive from Lauren directly within the next couple days, along with a link to where the resources are located, the collaboration site, the main TRM webpage, which is public and will have this recording and the slide deck and things like that. And then again, In the email will be another request to follow up with Lauren by Wednesday if you're interested in joining the new construction working group session that is yet to be fleshed out and yet to be scheduled, but we're trying to, first step, create a group of interested parties to include in that. Whew. Lauren, do you have any additional information that I have forgotten or would like to?
That was really comprehensive and a lot of work went into that. So thank you, Jenna. I do actually have one thing that I didn't share with you. It's noted within the priority list that I want to call out, and then I want to bring up Carl's question below or in the chat. So the first thing is, I want to say a year ago, 2 years ago, we had folks from CSBR present on updated weather files due to our changing climate in Minnesota. My understanding based on conversations with those folks is no, there are not updated weather files that they're able to share with us at this point in time. So updated TMY like files, but that's a future research need. They need more funding to do that. And then Duluth is still an area around Duluth is still an area where they're still trying to figure out what is the appropriate methodology to do this forecasting work appropriately. So I think that's still an open item. I've reached out to that team within just kind of the past week or so to get an update on that, because I think this is really critical for the work that we do in Minnesota within kind of the eco space and within the TRM and within card work, et cetera. So I'm trying to provide an update on that. And I know that there are other people who have other research teams who are doing research on future weather data. So if you are aware of that work that's being done, please feel free to share those links with me. I haven't done a full lit review within the past 2 years. But I know within the ACEEE summer study in 2024, this was a hot topic. So I'm going to try to follow up with those contacts from that conference again, but this is an ask for you all to share information with me that you're aware of. Also, if you have had conversations with the CSBR team and your understanding of that TMY like files is different than my understanding, please also feel free to share that with me via email and me and Jenna via email, and we can work through that as well. So that's the one thing that I didn't share with you, Jenna, but like I said, it's included within the priority list as a research need. The other thing, Carl had a question. Will there be a working group related to the M&V protocol? So that's for the pre-M&V plans and post-M&V reports. My question back to him, or comment and then question, is at this point in time, no. But my question, I guess, to you all is if there is interest, that's something we can absolutely do. We can spend an hour walking through this, taking feedback, talking through it. But the big thing is, one, is there interest? And then two, do we have capacity for this? I think the intention moving forward would be to take a look at this protocol every couple of years. I know I wanted to do that last year in a better way, but we'll do it 5.1, and then hopefully we'll do it 6.1 as well, just to kind of keep these iterations moving forward and using best practices continuously. So I'll include that question in a follow-up email, but yeah, that's an option. And Carl, did you come off mute?
Yeah, I was just gonna chime in and say yeah, I think it could be valuable to have at least one session on it. Like you said, it's been a long time since these M&V protocols have been examined. I believe we sent you over some feedback last year, kind of related to that proposed protocol. And I think it'd just be worth it to bounce that off of the rest of the utility stakeholders here. As Excel, we do a lot of these large projects with our industrial customers, so we end up following it quite a bit and having a lot of interesting scenarios with it. So I certainly would love to hear other people's perspectives on the protocol, because maybe there are some reasons that some things are included where we might not think they're important. So certainly I think it would be important for us to get kind of that holistic view, but then also just kick the wheels, make sure we're updating it in the direction that we're thinking about it. And I think one thing, and I can't remember exactly how we had laid this out, or if it was laid out at all, but M&V, I think as we think about M&V for efficient fuel switching projects, I think that's a place where there's some room for kind of work as well. you know, right now for like combo projects, there's kind of like a BTU threshold that we look at. And I'm just kind of like been trying to think about how we want to do that for EFS going forward as we get more comfortable with it as a state. So.
Awesome. Thank you, Carl. Those are great comments. And yeah, we need to, how do we incorporate EFS within these M&V protocols? I think that's huge. Jenna, that is it for me. Does anybody else have any comments, questions, comments they want to hop off mute to share? I'm not hearing any. So Jenna, feel free to close us out.
Lauren and I are always available via our email addresses, which are here. If you would like to get in touch with us for anything, feedback, comments, concerns, we're around. Thanks, everyone. Thanks for your time, as always. Thanks for your time and expertise. We really appreciate it.
Thank you.